Welcome to this informational meeting. My name's Dave Rossie. I'm the moderator. You can't blame me for anything that goes on here because I'm supposedly all neutral on this subject. Very briefly, I'm going to introduce the panelists for the program. Candace Mingins lives with her husband and 3 children on their family farm in Etten, New York. They planted an orchard. They're in their 34th garden year. A Trenton Black River well was drilled on their property in 2006. And as a result, 2 years later, she helped organize a Shaleshock Citizens Action Coalition. You'll hear from Theo Colborn, in remote from Colorado. Dr. Colborn is a veteran researcher of natural gas production and started near her home, after it started near her home in Colorado, she's founder of the Endocrine Disruption Exchange and has testified before Congress on the subject. Ron Gola is a resident of, Hickory, Pennsylvania. He's farmed there since he was 10 years old. And recently the farming went bad as a result of him having leased property to one of the well drilling outfits. They have an 118-acre farm. They have had a well polluted on their property along with a pond. Don Barber is the town of Caroline supervisor. That's up near Ithaca. He grew up on a dairy farm in Danby and still lives on a small farm with his family. As supervisor, he has led several important water quality and conservation projects. He chairs the Tompkins County Council of Governments and also owns a successful residential construction company. In addition, with us are, on my immediate right, Glenn Williams, who will say a few words before the panelists start. So without further ado, here's Glenn Williams.
This forum was sponsored by BRISC. We call it BRISC, but it's really Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition, which is kind of a mouthful. BRISC is easier. It's also sponsored by Shaleshock of Ithaca, which is an organization similar to BRISC. Another one from Spencer Van Etten called Citizens Energy Alliance. In addition to that, the other sponsors are Center for Civil Engagement, Citizen Action, the Sierra Club, and the Susquehanna Valley Presbyterian Justice and Mission Committee. The purpose of BRISC and Shaleshock and Citizens Energy Alliance is to try and improve the quality of life in the communities where we are. That's what it is. It's also to sustain the good parts and improve the rest. The BRISC position on gas drilling is that we are not opposed to drilling unless the health of people or the financial well-being of people are impacted by drilling. To try and find out, there's so many stories that come across the way, rumors, etc. It's hard to sort out the pepper from the fly specks. But we've tried very hard to do that and tried to engage in what is truthful and what we can substantiate. There are other groups involved, but they're the gas companies, the government, and the landowners. All 3 of those have profit motives as part of the reason how they operate. These 3 organizations that I mentioned to you do not have any profit. There is no money for us to make no matter what happens. It has been said as a defense why this is safe is that there are 14,000 wells that have been drilled in western New York without a single incident or a single problem. We find that to get a pants on fire rating, it's not really true. There have been problems. If you talk to the counties of Chautauqua and you talk to the people in Allegheny County, I think they would counter that statement. We try to go a little further with that, and we contact the DEC because the DEC also is making that claim. So we sent a FOIL request to DEC and asked them the question whether we could or not get a copy of the data that they'd accumulated on these problems. Well, they had to admit in writing that they have no data. They've never done any. They've never monitored any problems that have occurred in those places. So there isn't any information. So for anyone to say that 14,000 wells have been drilled safely, no one has that information to prove it or disprove it. As you probably know, the Marcellus Shale, of which we sit in the middle of it, is one of the largest gas finds, natural gas finds on Earth. Some have said it's the third largest on Earth. I don't know if that's true or false. Some said it's the largest find in North America. I don't know if that's true or false either, but obviously there is a lot of gas here. The difference is that they're going to use slick water fracking, which was a method of drilling developed by Halliburton. And the difference is that in many of the wells in western New York, they used maybe up to 80,000 gallons of water, and 1% of that is chemicals. Here, you're looking at maybe 5 million gallons of water per well. 1% is 50,000 gallons of chemicals. And as some have tried to say in defense of their drilling, that what they use is water, sand, a lubricant, and a few other chemicals. Well, the truth of the matter is they use up to 300 different chemicals, of which, according to Dr. Colborn, 65 are either carcinogenic or cause other kinds of health problems such as endocrine disruption. In terms of the money, hard to track that too. Talked to the town supervisor, Jim Goldstein, in the town of Lebanon, and he tells us that they have 55 working gas wells in their town. It cost them $300,000 to repair the roads from last year. They got $12,000 back from the gas companies. In terms of the landowners are taxed up to 42%. That's federal and state combined. They could lose value of their home in its entirety or in part. They also face the possibility of lawsuits from neighbors who've had their water, etc., impacted. So there's a question whether landowners really are going to make money or whether they're not. I don't know who can actually prove that they can or can't. In terms of safe water, the gas companies say the water is safe, they don't contaminate wells, etc. Then you have to ask the question why the Vice President of the United States and his people were able to get the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act canceled for gas drilling. If things were going to be so rosy and so good, why did they have to stop those items from being, those laws from being in place when everyone else in the country has to abide by them? DIMIC, you've all heard of DIMIC. Well, in DIMIC, initially, Cabot made a statement to the media that they couldn't understand how methane gas could travel a half a mile from the drilling site. Well, that seems to be a facetious comment because the truth is that they knew that gas travels a half a mile or more, or can, because it's happened all over the country. It was nothing new. A couple of quick personal items, trying to get at the truth. We're dealing with some tough people, and the landowners know that. That's why they have lawyers to help them. My wife has an aunt, or had an aunt, and she died a couple of years ago. She was in a nursing home. She had Parkinson's disease. She was very demented. She didn't even know us. She had made my wife and I executors for her estate. I got a call from a Chesapeake landman one day. He wanted to know if we would sign a gas lease for them. And I said, and I didn't know much about it at the time at all, and maybe I still don't, but I said, send me the paperwork. I want to see what you say in writing. He said, fine, and he did. I read it, and I said, there's no way I would sign such a lease, and I called and told him that. He went up to the nursing home and tried to get her on her deathbed to sign a lease. So that's a personal issue that's happened that I know about. There's a little pond near my shop in Pennsylvania. Chesapeake went in and got the cottage owners to sign a lease there. They took the lease and they put it under another corporation called Chesapeake Appalachia. The interesting thing about Chesapeake Appalachia is that it's an LLC. It's a limited liability corporation. The only way it makes any sense for them to have done that is that if things go wrong and they pollute the pond, they can walk away, declare bankruptcy, and the big corporation is not affected. To me, the gas companies have to do at least the very following. They need to pay for testing of wells, both before and after, and at interims, or maybe every year or two, as long as they're drilling. They need to replace loss of home value because of compulsive integration, someone may drill a well very close to your property line and cause your home value to go down the tubes. They also should replace any water. If they damage the aquifer, they ought to do that. I'm concerned as things now stand, as the fight that they're making against helping you and keeping it straight, that the ones that are going to lose in this process are the citizens without land. Thank you.
In 1971, when my husband's family bought their farm in Van Etten, there was an abandoned Oriskany well on the property. There were indeed abandoned wells all over the neighboring hills, some of which were providing neighbors with free gas. A small pipe and tank were all that gave evidence. They seemed innocuous enough. So when a neighbor came by in 1999 with his friend, an oil and gas man who owned a small company in Pennsylvania, we signed a 10-year lease. It was a community-held belief in Van Etten, as evidenced by past experience, that gas wells were no big deal. Nearly all our neighbors signed. There were no informational forums back then, nor attorneys who knew what was coming. 5 years later, after the lower rights to our lease were assigned to a multinational corporation, we realized something bigger was happening and finally sought an attorney's help. The first attorney we saw was knowledgeable, but was only interested in helping us if we exercised a sale clause that we had in our lease and sell our land to a friend of his who invested in oil and gas, and he would get 33% of the royalties. We were not comfortable with this. The second attorney willingly assisted us with the high-pressure 11th hour negotiations with the gas company, who now wanted to drill a well on our farm. But it soon became clear that he knew nothing about the industrial gas drilling coming. The very charge of finding a reliable attorney who knew what needed to be known at that time was a near impossible task. We didn't even know what questions to ask. We scrambled to come up with last-minute protections, mostly from bits and pieces of information we were now getting from neighbors. The gas company was willing to negotiate, as they had not yet gotten us to sign an amending agreement, which they needed. We forged a restoration agreement to make sure our beautiful field, Howard Gravelly Loam, was restored. The well was drilled in the Trenton Black River Formation, a conventional well that went nearly 2 miles down and 1 mile horizontally under the village. It was a huge industrial operation, a far cry from the old Oriskany wells on our hill. From day one, the gas company began to cut corners. What was to be just a couple of acres was actually 7 acres. We measured it. We asked that the access road run along the edge of the field. They cut it diagonally through the field. The landsman who had been negotiating with us had actually helped us flag where the road was to be, and he argued for us to get them to redo the road. It just went on and on. The holding ponds were supposed to have 2 layers of plastic. They only had 1. The brine was supposed to be hauled out more often than it was. We felt that we had to be constantly checking, taking pictures, calling the gas company. Of course, the operation was an industrial site we never could have imagined. 24-hour drilling, ramming noise, lit up all night. It went longer than they said it would, taking 3 months. And when the well was flared for 3 days and the whole valley was lit up like a stadium, it began to feel like something terrible had been unleashed. When it was time to restore the larger outer area of the well site, the gas company cut corners once again, even though the procedure was spelled out clearly in a written agreement. They used a bulldozer to remove the plastic and large rocks, hauling much of our precious topsoil with it. My husband furiously tried to get them to stop, and subsequently to bring us more topsoil to fill the depressions. Rude employees argued with him. They also never ripped the subsoil underneath before filling it in. We had a retired ag and markets consultant come to shoot some grades and write a recommendation, and this appeared to really annoy the gas company. They sent us a without prejudice letter stating that they had done all they had to do until final restoration, maybe 10 years hence. The friendly landsman who had worked on our behalf earlier was told to stop talking to us. We then knew if we ever wanted to have that field restored as per signed written agreement, we would have to get an attorney, and attorneys tell us now that only rarely can you get industry to pay your legal fees. Having a multinational corporation in your life is extremely stressful. It's a contractual relationship, but it is vastly unequal. Corporations are protected by law. They have rights as persons, but they are not persons. They are entities that are ultimately not liable, responsible, or responsive. Their sole job is to make money for their shareholders, and they will do what they have to do that. Oil and gas companies are essentially in the game of gotcha. Once you sign up, it's you who has to watch them, call them, sue them. It's your problem now. They are only obliging until they get what they want from you. Phone calls, emails, letters, lawyers, all become routine. Signing a lease with a multinational corporation is like inviting a very rude, unscrupulous, dare I say, criminal person to live in your home. It's extremely stressful. However, this well, we were assured, would only have a lifetime of about 10 years, and then they would be out of there all cleaned up like we didn't know they had been there. We thought we could live with that. Of course, at this point, we had no choice. And at this time, our daughter and her husband decided to go ahead and make plans to move their farm winery business to the family farm. And we were lucky ones. The well was successful. In fact, it was the most prolific well in New York State, and in 2006 produced 4 billion cubic feet of gas, enough to heat 57,000 homes for a year. 133 families and organizations receive royalties from this well, including the town, school, and church. Who couldn't use the money? Folks could finally repaint their houses and replace the roof. They could start retirement savings and donate to charities. We were able to finish our house, install solar panels, buy a tractor, and pay off some college loans. There is no denying that the people could use the money, but the question began to emerge: at what cost? In the spring of 2008, we began hearing talk of the next big gas play, the Marcellus Shale. At first, we thought nothing of it, but the more we learned, the more alarmed we became. And then it hit us. We were held by production with a producing well, and that meant that lease expiration was irrelevant. And while we are held by production, more wells may be drilled on our property in different formations, which in turn could hold us by production longer. In essence, we had sold our land forever. The night I realized this, I had a dream that our house had been robbed, and it was from the inside. Now our daughter seriously doubted they could move to the farm. How could they move here when there could be a lifetime of drilling, drastic change in our rural landscape, and potential contamination and pollution? We had sold the land out from under our children and their children, and no amount of money is worth that. Unconventional gas drilling is a nasty business, and I venture to guess that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of leased landowners out there who, as they learn what this new gas drilling really entails, wish that they had never signed. A contract between an individual and a multinational corporation is never on an even playing field. The power imbalance is staggering. Attorney Jane Welsh of Hamilton, New York, believes gas leases should actually be commercial lease transactions, which include the legal concepts and protections that are found in any commercial lease. And I quote, "The only reason they are not is that the parties to a gas lease are woefully mismatched in terms of negotiating power, experience, sophistication, and financial clout. New York State, she concludes, is sorely remiss for not regulating these leases. But this is not merely a leasing issue, though the Attorney General's Office, Cooperative Extension, and many landowner coalitions seem to believe it is. For one, it's a community issue. As Herb Eggman, town supervisor in Ithaca, recently said, and I'm paraphrasing, towns go through all the time and trouble and expense to generate comprehensive plans and protect community resources, and then gas companies come in and destroy all that. The scale of proposed shale gas drilling in the area will affect our entire landscape and rural way of life. Leases cannot protect us from plummeting real estate values or the inability to obtain mortgages or sell our property. Leases cannot protect us from a decline in tourism or other negative economic effects. Leases cannot protect us from the increased difficulty in obtaining insurance or the increased cost of doing so. And unless gas companies are willing to post billions of dollars in bonds, leases cannot ultimately protect us from personal liability. But above all, as we will see here tonight, this is a public health issue. Emerging studies on air pollution and reports of water contamination make it very clear that the negative effects of unconventional gas drilling cannot be contained by property boundaries. Whether you are leased in a coalition, or compulsorily integrated, or whether you are unleased, living down the road, downwind, or downstream of gas wells or deep injection disposal wells, or whether you simply use roads traveled by frack water trucks, we are all at increased risk. Our communities need full disclosure of the risks we will be exposed to before we can decide if we as a community want to take those risks. We do not want to be unwilling participants in a grand experiment, because that's what this is. And the truth is, no one even knows what the risks are. There have been no comprehensive long-term systematic studies on hydrofracking. There have been no comprehensive long-term systematic studies on deep injection disposal. But this high-pressure injection of contaminants into the ground appears to be linked to unpredictable migration of fluids, aquifer contamination, and possibly earthquakes. Have we mapped our entire area for natural faults? How do we know that the fracking fluid left behind won't eventually migrate upward and contaminate our water? Maybe not this year, but what about in 5 years or 50 years? While the gas companies and the DEC assure us that these activities are perfectly safe, they will not guarantee it because there is no science backing their claims. And in fact, more and more evidence is mounting to the contrary at the expense of people's health and safety. I am haunted by the specter of a future of turning on my tap for a glass of clear, cold, sweet water and wondering if chemicals left underneath have migrated into it. Do I test it once a year, once a month, every week? How can I live, how can we live with the unending uncertainty that this glass fill might be poisoned? Do I drink it? Do I offer it to my granddaughter? Thank you.
I'm going to take you on a tour of Western Colorado, sharing with you what my staff and I have learned about the hazards posed directly and indirectly to human health and the environment by natural gas production and delivery. Okay, I got involved with government incentives to explore and develop natural gas in 2002, led to a company announcing that it was drilling for natural gas on the top of the Grand Mesa, one of the largest flat-top mountains in the world, and what my county and other counties consider our watershed. At that time, natural gas operations had already increased significantly across the western half of the state of Colorado, reflecting the administration's desire to become less dependent upon foreign energy, and the administration announcing a moratorium on the use of federal environmental laws to regulate natural gas activity. Then there was another surge in natural gas activity after Congress passed the 2005 Energy Appropriations Bill with a clause that made official the administration's moratorium on the use of the Clean Water Act, State Drinking Water Act, Clean Air Act, CERCLA, the Superfund Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act to regulate the industry. So throughout my talk, I will use Colorado as a model for what you might want to think about as natural gas activity commences in your region. But keep in mind that our western ecosystem is unique, just as the ecosystem where you live is unique, and modifications may be needed to best protect your health and those special features related to your life support system, water and air. Here you see natural gas wells on each side of the Colorado River, the source of water for over 30 million people downstream. You can also see the 4-lane west to east Interstate 70. And this picture looks to the east, where you can see the haze over the mountains up toward Aspen. Out here, the west moves to the southwest to the northeast under most conditions. You should be thinking about the weather patterns that are specific for your area as we move through this talk. Now, this picture was taken several miles downstream from the last picture, showing how gas activity spreads. You should be able to see the Colorado River in the bottom left and right-hand corners of the picture, with I-70 as well. Here, there is approximately one well pad on every 35 or 40 acres. Today, in Colorado, as in Wyoming, you can find one well pad on every 10 acres. And if you look closely, you will see that each well pad has an open evaporation pit, something that the state of New York, for instance, does not allow because the evaporation rate there is so low. In most instances, when gas comes up from the ground, it comes up wet. And for the production life of the well, that water has to be removed and put somewhere. Here in the West, it ends up in an open pit or a holding tank above or below ground, tanks that have to be emptied on a regular basis for the life of the well, or the water can be trapped and re-injected on the site or piped to a central injection site. You can see a huge open evaporation pit on the side of the mountain that services the wells in that area. Large water trucks operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to haul the water from the pad to here, where they unload the water at the top and then it trickles down over the tiered ponds. And you might be able to see the pictures, the little white dots in the uppermost pit with water. From here on, we will start looking at 4 stages of natural gas operations where chemicals are found. Drilling, where the hole is made to reach the gas. Fracking, where the underground is fractured to facilitate the release of the gas. Processing, where objectionable material is removed from the gas. And handling of the waste chemicals and other byproducts. So let's look at drilling first. I show this picture because the drilling activity you see here, hundreds of feet above the road, is taking place in the headwaters of a river that feeds a reservoir several miles down the road to the left of the picture. That reservoir provides a large part of the agricultural and drinking water for the valley I live in. I could not capture all the wells in the picture because I wanted to show where this activity took place in relation to the road. The reason I show this is to point out that this activity is on private land and not in the county where I live. All of the revenue from that activity will go to the landowner and another county. My county has no control over what is taking place in our watershed that lies in another county. Yet it was our county that had to put up with huge trucks hauling gravel, sand, and water on a narrow 2-lane highway with no shoulders while this activity was taking place, leaving our roads full of potholes. Now, this is not a unique situation, and it is happening across the country. Now, this well was being drilled, again, on private land above, surrounded by national forests in the same region shown in the last picture. The reserve pit is lined with white material. I'm sorry, I live in a town where coal trains go through every couple hours. Okay. The reserve pit is lined with white material to hold the cuttings from the drill pipe on one side and the fluids and mud to surface during drilling on the other side. These pits are supposed to be filled in within 30 days after the well is completed. Now, if you look below the white line pit, you will see a larger pit still being dug for the water that will come off the gas as it surfaces. This is the vertical well now that you're looking at it, and it can take as long as 3 to 4 weeks to drill, depending on how deep the gas is and the geology. And an investment in a well like this is around $800,000. This is a mature pad from Garfield County, Colorado, along Divide Creek, where a new well was being drilled. You can easily see the temporary reserve pit to the left of the drill rig that collects cuttings and fluids as the well is being dug, and also the larger evaporation pit that has been in operation since the first well was completed on this pad to hold the water recovered from the gas as it comes from the ground. Now, we were surprised when we flew over that day that drilling was taking place on this pad, because several years earlier, methane began to bubble up in Divide Creek and escape from the ground in the neighborhood. A major corporation was fined $350,000 over this incident, and the neighbors still insist that escaped methane is still a problem there today. Within the last 2 years, we began to find large operations like this, and I expect that this may be what the large energy operators will be proposing as natural gas leases are being sold in other regions of the country, like New York. This is a horizontal or directional drilling operation, and an investment like this would be about $2.5 million or more. It is here in the Rome Plateau area where the latest technology is being tried out, and it will soon be used in the east. It is supposed to be the most economically efficient way to produce gas. There are 2 drill rigs operating on this pad, perhaps using a diamond drill or one of the newer bits that can cut drilling time in more than half. There are already 10 wells on this pad, but you can see the 10 condensate tanks and the 10 pipes beside them over in the left-hand corner. Those pipes that come up out of the ground called Christmas trees, where the gas is stuck up the ground. Those 2 double-wide trailers are called a man camp. The workers often stay on the pad around the clock because they have to have someone there constantly until the drilling ceases. We were told that there would eventually be 28 or 30 wells on this one pad. Now keep in mind that each well can be fracked 10 times. So easy math means that there could be 280 or 300 fractures done from this pad alone. So, what is fracking? Industry has started to use the term stimulation instead of fracking for the operational stage. Wells are fractured in order to increase their productivity. Extremely high levels of pressure are continually maintained down the pipe to pump fluids to various designated depths, and then using the latest state-of-the-art explosives at each perforation in the pipe, it causes what the industry describes as mini earthquakes to facilitate the release of the gas. In this stage, as much as 1 million gallons or more of fluids are injected under high pressure out here in the West. Now, in the Marcellus Shale and Barnett Shale areas, called slick water areas, according to estimates coming out of Pennsylvania and New York, the companies are planning to use 2.5 to 3.4 million gallons of fluid per frac. I was told the other day possibly up to 9 million gallons per frac. Fracking technology will differ among various parts of the country, depending on how and in what matrix the gas is extracted. Now, this is an artist's simple conception of what fracking looks like. In the top left, you see huge compressor trucks that are used to maintain high pressure throughout the procedure, sometimes as long as 36 hours around the clock. The tanks depict the large volumes of diesel fuel that must be available at all times to keep all of the equipment running once the procedure starts. Notice that the drill rig is gone. To the right, try to picture dozens of fracking tanks which hold the fluids to be injected underground. These are on wheels with lots of fittings for pipes and hoses, as large as a train car, with vents on top. The tanks also serve as receptacles for the fracking fluids when they come back up to the surface, as the compressors shut down and the pressure drops as the procedure comes to an end. Here you see the pipe inserted vertically into the ground, penetrating many geological layers. Here in western Colorado, gas is found at various depths, from 4,000 to 8,000 feet, and in our San Luis Valley, as deep as 10,000 to 12,000 feet. But what you see here is vertical fractures, and we show 4 different fractures extending from the pipe every 60 degrees or less. Each one of the vents made from the perforation can extend out about 2,000 feet and may only be a couple of inches in height. Now, they would extend far beyond the edge of this picture. We have computer problems trying to draw what we wanted to draw, but this would extend out about another half a mile away. So each frac would then be done separately, starting from the bottom up of that pipe that you see in the ground, at depth at about every 1,000 to 1,500 feet in the shale that they're fracturing in. Now, horizontal drilling involves gradually making the borehole bend after the hole reaches a predetermined depth. Engineers start bending the pipe when they are sure they are below any possible usable water. And out here in the west, that would be about a depth of 400 feet. The drilling equipment has to be changed at this point as the bend starts. And to complete the bend, so that the bore is finally horizontal, it takes as much as 2,500 feet of pipe. And according to the literature, excuse me, I forgot to do my click here. And according to the literature, where did I lose? I lost track. Okay. Okay, once the pipe is horizontal, it can then be extended another 2,000 feet or more. The advantage of this is that there has to be no equipment above ground from which the gas will be extracted, which could be almost a mile in any direction surrounding that borehole. Now, during the procedure, numerous chemicals in various combinations are added to the fluids that are injected underground. The chemicals range from biocides, powerful chemicals used to kill bacteria that can live without oxygen as well as those that need oxygen. Because bacteria can produce acids that eat pipes and fittings and produce a toxic gas, hydrogen sulfide, that smells like rotten eggs and is highly toxic. And because the biocides can alter the physical characteristics of some of the chemicals in the fluids. A lot of chemicals are used to make slurries, slippery, from surfactants, lubricants, anything to reduce friction, like microfine silica, antioxidants, acids to foamers and proppants to keep the fracture open after the explosion, polymers, alcohols, and acrylamides, all added to alter the underground strata to allow methane to escape up the pipe. Now, the chemicals are not all added at the same time. They are introduced in stages, very carefully worked out by engineers who may be thousands of miles away at corporate headquarters. Like drilling, it's a noisy operation, compressors running, lit up at night as if it were daytime. It can go on for 36 hours or more. And if you live nearby, you might be able to hear your house jiggle at each explosive event. Large diesel-driven trucks are needed for many purposes, like dump trucks ready to mix in sand. You will see dump trucks, frac tanks, and fill tanks to hold the fluids for the frac, later collect the fluids and come back to the surface after compression stops. Lots of pipes, lots of hoses. With smaller operations, also, there are 42-gallon drums, chemicals sitting around on backs of trucks with chemicals ready to be mixed into slurry. Estimates range from 30% to 70%, and I just got one now from Pennsylvania that it would be 20 to 80% of the fluids injected underground during fracking are recovered, but so far we have not been able to find a publication where actual volumes were measured or ingredients analyzed and quantified. The recovered water can be reinjected on site or hauled off to be reinjected at the central site, or in the west, at times put in open evaporation pits. No fluids, I want to remind you, were recovered from those wells I showed you up the valley from my home. Now here is an actual fracking going on, and I'm going back to this picture because it gives me the opportunity to introduce the fact that water is not the only life support system at risk in producing natural gas. Air quality is also at risk. Up until 3 years ago, air quality got little attention in the gas field. Little consideration had been given to the amount of diesel that is burned to produce natural gas. When you add up the exhaust from the labor force diesel trucks and the corporate trucks and huge machinery needed to extract the gas, the exhaust begins to reach very high levels that contain nitrogen oxides or NOx, as well as volatile organic compounds, for short called VOCs. And when nitrogen oxide and VOCs float up into the air in presence of sunlight, they produce what is called ground-level ozone. It is now apparent that stationary and mobile equipment required to produce and deliver natural gas can cause an urban life smog problem rich in ozone, and especially in areas of high production. Now, we need ozone in the stratosphere to protect us from ultraviolet light, but at ground level, it poses a serious threat to all animals, including humans, and plants, including the trees in our forests and our agricultural lands. One molecule of ozone can burn a hole in the deep alveolar tissue in your lungs. It is well documented that daily exposure to ozone leads to early aging of the lungs. They become brittle and dry out. The lungs cannot repair this kind of damage. Every exposure incident builds upon damage that was already there. Chronic ozone exposure can cause asthma, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other pulmonary disorders. Children are especially vulnerable because their lungs continue to grow and enlarge until about age 18. As they mature in the presence of ozone, their alveoli production is reduced, and they end up with brittle lungs like those of an 80-year-old. Ozone was always thought to be only an urban problem caused by the exhaust of gasoline combustion in automobiles, the NOxes, and the volatile organic compounds, or the VOCs of gasoline fumes. The same VOCs that are released from natural gas operations. We now have in the West an urban air pollution phenomenon that no one suspected would happen. Now, we came upon this fracking operation while we were looking for the tunnel that had been drilled through a mountain to reduce the long trip to a county road. You can see the tunnel way up in the left-hand corner, and those are huge trucks going through there, so you can get a feeling about the depth and perception amount of effort they went to shorten their trip. Okay, there are already 8 completed wells on this pad. If you look to the left, below the pad, you can see 8 condensate tanks, water holding tanks there. There are actually 35 green fracking tanks, each about the size of a train car, nested side by side to the left of the pad, 35 more along the back, and zooming in on it at our office, we counted almost 100 tanks on the pad. You can also see the white cab of at least 8 generator trucks and chemical mixing trucks lined up near the hole where all the activity is taking place. Now, when the gas first comes from the ground, the water must be stripped off, as well as other gases like pentane, propane, and noxious gases that include benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, called Etten. So before the natural gas methane moves into the local delivery pipeline, it has to be dried and cleaned up a little. Now here is a pad that we showed you from the air earlier, where drilling has ceased and the wells are now set up to produce gas, perhaps for another 25 years. There are 5 wells on this pad. See the shadow to the left of the picture? That is one of 5 interesting-looking contraptions called Christmas trees in the foreground. That is where the gas comes up from the ground from each well on the pad. To the right, you can see a solar panel that monitors the air temperature. And when it gets near freezing, it releases methanol, wood alcohol, from that white tank into the gas coming out of the ground to prevent the pipe from freezing. Now, this is a very important safety factor. To the left and to the back, you can see the separator unit with 5 light bulbs dehydrated. As the gas comes out of the ground, it is passed through a liquid in the separator column called ethylene glycol that sucks the water out of the gas. The column is then heated and the water evaporated off to condense in the tank that I will show you in a minute. Those noxious gases I mentioned, such as the BTEX, and I'll repeat them once more, benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and diamine, are allowed to vent off here. The orange arrow points at a pipe for flaring off those gases when the pressure gets high enough. So you never know when one of those things are going to flare. It is important to keep in mind that throughout all the processes you have seen so far, a great deal of natural gas is escaping it as well. And natural gas, or methane, as it is called, is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Now you see the 5 volt tanks I mentioned. Sorry, the way we took this picture, you cannot see all 5. These tanks are supposed to be burned so that if 75% of the fluid in the tank were to leak, all of it would be contained on the site. For the life of this pad, as long as it keeps producing gas, water trucks will have to come and haul off the condensate. And what you see on this pad, therefore, now is called stationary equipment. It's not moving about. And the vehicles that service this stationary unit are referred to as mobile equipment. And now we know that air pollution comes from both stationary and mobile sources during the production of natural gas. Now, this is the compressor unit, one of many needed along pipelines to keep the gas at a high enough pressure so that there is no backflow from the main delivery line. Here you see 2 separator columns and no holding tank. Since no one could be found here to talk with us, we could only speculate that this is one of the new units where produced water is being stored in an underground tank, or perhaps being piped to a deep well injection site that was recently built in this area. But in order to get the gas from the primary delivery system into the large, long-distance system, the long-distance system is run at 400 pounds per square inch. This unit has to be producing 500 pounds per square inch. The generators moving those huge fans are located inside the building, are also producing NOx and high levels of BTEX and other heavy volatiles. There is technology available today to build these as closed systems, capturing as much as 90% of the VOC that would come off. The original capital outlay is a little high, but for the amount of gas that the new systems require capture, the new units are paying off in 3 to 5 years. Now, gas is to be polished once more before it enters the interstate commercial delivery lines. And here you see a picture of a refinery in southwestern Colorado that releases huge volumes of foul-smelling nitrogen and sulfur-based volatile compounds around the clock. Because gas production is so high in this region of the state, British Petroleum built another refinery just up the road several miles, which we could not see from the road. This plant takes water out of the local river to wash the gas after the noxious substances have been removed. Now, in your planning, you need to take into consideration where a unit like this will be needed. Your organizations to be alert and watch for notices of intent to build these kinds of units. And for economic purposes, they will most likely be built near a major pipeline. Now, waste fluids and sludge are handled in a number of ways. The following pictures are shown only to demonstrate that huge bodies of water must be dealt with in the production of natural gas. In the West, we can count on evaporation. In the more humid areas of the country, that will not work. So now this is the evaporation pit for the wash water from the refinery I just showed you. Note the cannon-like apparatus shooting the water into the air to assist evaporation. And note how the berm around this pond is beginning to crack. Right in the foreground, you can see it. Now this is an evaporation pit for the wash water from, pits like this serve a large number of wells, usually for one operator. Look closely and you should be able to see the red tab on the water truck unloading. We know that's a Halliburton truck because the cab is red. Schlumberger's trucks are green and somebody else's are blue. Amazing. So a unit like this is another source for nitrogen oxides and VOCs, and we can see no nets over these pits. Now this facility accepted truckloads of fluids from small developers and wildcatters for radius of 35 miles or more. No sampling or accounting for the chemicals in the incoming fluids took place at this unit or any other disposable units that we know of. When the pits dry out and become sludge, the rest is then land farmed. It is dipped into the soil and supposed to biodegrade. However, the biocides used during drilling and fracking would undoubtedly make the land incapable of producing much vegetation and allow no biodegradation. Quite a few of the products on our Colorado list contain silica dust, which when it dries will rapidly flow about as dust. Silica dust can cause silicosis, a serious lung disorder that can lead to a rapid and lethal form of lung cancer. Fine dust particles increase the smog or haze effect of ozone as well. Now this facility was closed recently, and water from Colorado now is being trucked 100 miles one way into Utah to a much larger facility. Now in 2003, the highly respected nationwide oil and gas watchdog organization, OPAP, asked us about the health effects of the chemicals used in gas operations and started sending us lots of material safety data sheets that are attached to products that contain hazardous chemicals. That was when one of our staff and a pre-doctoral student at MIT on an NSF grant working with us for the summer set out to systematically set up a database in order to look at the long list of chemicals that we had at hand. As they began to look closely at the health effects, a consistent pattern or profile of the health effects kept popping up based on the 14 traditional toxicological categories used in government publications. Now, the last time this program was updated for Colorado alone, there were 246 products and 278 chemicals on the list. 93% of the 246 products had identifiable health effects. The other 7% represent the products for which we had limited information because the ingredients were listed as either proprietary or the names were too general or no ingredients were listed. 5 of the products on this list had no ingredient information at all. Of those products that had health effects, 40% had 1 to 3 effects and 86% had 4 to 14 effects. And what surprised us was to find that 43% of the products on our list contain endocrine disruptors, chemicals that can interfere with the development of individuals before they are born and cause irreversible lifetime changes in their health and how they function. Wildlife, starting at the lowest levels of the food web, has proven to be sensitive to chemicals of this nature at ambient concentrations. We then looked at chemicals based on their major pathways of exposure. Were they soluble? Could they evaporate? We were able to identify 63% of the 278 chemicals on our list using what are called CAS numbers, those are CAS numbers, the American Chemical Society's Chemical Abstract Numbering System. The CAS number made it possible to specifically identify and search the literature for the health effects of the chemicals. And we created the following bar graph based on the results of our literature search. Now, looking at the water-soluble chemicals alone, this is the health profile they produce. The bars tell you how often a certain health category is associated with all the chemicals on the list. And remember, a chemical can have up to 14 health effects. So, in essence, what turned out, as you can see, way up on the left, is skin and eye irritation and sensitization. 95% of the chemicals could cause those effects. So now let's start. It turned out that those health categories for vital systems most often associated with the chemicals, starting from left to right, are the skin, eye, and sensory organs, the respiratory system, the stomach and the liver, and the brain and the nervous system. The adverse health effects expressed by those systems in many cases would occur shortly after exposure. These are conditions that may not often be brought to the attention of doctors because they seem minor. Itching, burning skin, burning eyes, sore throat, nausea, headache, sinusitis, flu-like symptoms, sensitization, fatigue, dizziness, mild tingling in the extremities that can lead to permanent nerve damage that is irreversible. Or if the effects were severe, if they had direct contact and it got on their skin and could be burning them, the person would be brought to an emergency room first for treatment for direct exposure to the skin. Now, the other health categories, continuing on from the left to the right, include ecological effects. Those would be what I mentioned earlier, the invertebrate wildlife, cardiovascular and heart, the immune system, other, which includes bone damage and death, the reproductive system, development, mutagenicity, cancer, and endocrine disorders. All health problems that would not be expressed immediately, but could turn up as chronic health problems months or years later. They could never be traced directly to industry exposure. Now here you see the profile associated with the identifiable volatile chemicals that is almost the same, but with greater frequency as more chemicals are linked with the chronic long-term disorder. Now it is important to point out here where cancer lies on the graph. This analysis reveals that 38% of the chemicals can cause cancer, compared to 78% of the chemicals that can cause brain and nervous system damage. Now maybe we should be more interested in these other health effects to the left when determining the health risks caused by the chemicals used in this industry. Yet most risk analyses are based on the probability of developing cancer. Now, this is a picture of one of the 400-bed van camps to house the gas-filled workers, to make sure they have enough people to work around the clock. Men are being flown into Colorado from Canada to work for 4 weeks, 12 hours off and 12 hours on, around the clock, and never leave the gas patch until they fly back to Canada for 2 weeks off, and then back to Colorado again. Now, these laborers, also the local laborers who come into work, generally work 12-hour shifts. And men coming off their shifts are exhausted. They complain of severe headaches and have other complaints matching some of what I mentioned earlier. And now, for a long time, we believed what the developers were telling us, that drilling muds are benign. Until we got an urgent request to see if we had any information about 40 products used in Wyoming during drilling. There had been a serious blowout during a routine drilling operation in Wyoming. This was a new well where the drillers got to a depth of 8,000 feet and something went wrong with the casing near the surface, and at an extremely high pressure the well began to blow out. There were 2 major cracks at the surface from which mud and gases flew up into the air, and ooze came out of the road cuts and ran down the county road. It took 57 hours to get it under control. This was adjacent to a housing development. And it was not surprising to hear that the people living in the area had to be evacuated using respirators and stay away from their homes for days because of the noxious fume. Now, respiratory system is over on the left-hand column this time, far left, and then followed by skin and eye, gastro, liver, ecological, immune, kidney, cancer, neuro, and cardiovascular effects. Now, this next slide shows us what we were able to learn about the chemical spills when a fracking mixing chemical truck was involved in an accident in Garfield County, Colorado, on one of those narrow two-lane county roads with no shoulders. The truck heading to a fracking operation spilled 318 gallons of material that contained 4 products. According to the material safety data sheets, there were 15 different chemicals involved. And here you can see how they fell out by health category. The column on the farthest left basically is eco, and then skin and eye, gastro, liver, neuro, respiratory, kidney, cardiovascular. And then you'll see as you go across that profiles for the water-soluble chemicals, all 4 of those chemicals were associated with all the health categories that we show here. Then we were sent back in 2007 the results from 6 New Mexico evaporation pits that are scheduled to be shut down in the near future. The health effects of the 51 chemicals and metals that were detected produced a health pattern even more hazardous than the patterns of the chemicals found in our spreadsheets for the state of New Mexico. In addition, some chemicals were found at extremely high concentrations, well above New Mexico and federal safety levels. But only 8 chemicals detected in the pit matched the chemicals used in New Mexico during drilling and fracking. Upon looking at the chemical testing protocols used in the New Mexico pit study, we found that except for naphthalene, they did not test for the other chemicals that we have on our list that are being used in New Mexico, which raises questions. How are these chemicals getting into the pit? And we turned and we actually looked and found that over 90% of the chemicals reported in the pits are on the CERCLA, or the Superfund list of toxic chemicals, or the extra list, the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act list for toxic chemicals. So, how did they get there? Well, keep in mind that all of the products on our list for all states combined, we know nothing about the composition for almost half of them, and only know the full composition for a little more than 10% of them. The industry is not telling us very much. Now, let's get away from the pits, go back up into the mountains, and it is a rare day in the West anymore when we can take a picture without a blue haze destroying the vistas, and here you see our blue haze. Here you see the high country, where gas development is encroaching on our beautiful forests and mountain meadows and in a major western watershed. Recently, scientists at NOAA reported wintertime ozone in the Wyoming-Jonah-Pinedale anticline gas fields rising to more than 140 parts per billion. And 2 years ago, Pinedale and the Jackson Hole area hit 155 parts per billion. They had to shut down ski areas and they had to keep the children in school because they left to go out to play outside. Our Rocky Mountain forests lie right in the path of the air pollution from gas and oil development to the west and could easily be caught in an ozone plume. Ozone plumes can extend over 200 miles. Like the alveoli in our lungs, stomata in leaves on deciduous trees and needles on conifers suffer ozone burns. Reduced growth rates, increased susceptibility to disease, and early deaths have been blamed on ozone in evergreen forests, commercial tree species, and food and forest crops across the United States, starting at only 50 parts per billion. These recent readings were more than double that. Now, the trees in our mountain forests in the west are the keepers of our water. They make it possible for us to have water year-round. Not only does ozone pose a direct threat to human health, it is also posing a covert threat to our already marginal freshwater supply in the West by weakening our trees. We know now that wherever natural gas operations are going to commence or increase air pollution must be treated as seriously as water pollution. Downwind effects on agriculture and those living in rural areas must now be taken into consideration. So we need to know a lot more. Products must be labeled with the complete formulation, along with the quantity or concentration of every chemical used in the product, and most important, identification of the fluids that are used to fill the products, the cans, the totes they deliver the chemicals in, to the brim. The source and quality of all water used to frack must be accounted for, as well as the formulation and how much of each product is used in the fracking fluid. We know dangerous chemicals are being mixed in large quantities in the gas fields by people who have no idea what they are using. Even the bosses have no idea what is being used, yet they will stand by the company's mantra that the chemicals are safe. The amount of fluids injected and recovered during fracking should be public information. Data should be made public about the chemical composition of what is in pits, on the well pads, and also in the off-site waste disposal areas. And from a life support system perspective in the West, we better find out how much of the water being taken from the Colorado River drainage basin to produce natural gas is being returned to the Colorado River system. Will this affect the Colorado River compact commitments for those states downstream? Now, this applies to all river drainages across the country, even in areas of high precipitation. Now, as the size and intensity of natural gas extraction increased over the past decade, so have numbers and amounts of chemicals increased, putting air and water resources and more people at risk. From a public health perspective, the time has come for full disclosure. Realistic, comprehensive water monitoring programs must be set up that include numerous downslope sites miles away at outcrops, watering holes, springs, creeks, domestic wells, where chemicals injected underground might eventually surface. Although it is too late already in some areas, baseline monitoring of water quality and ozone should commence immediately in all other areas where activity is going to start. And no matter where the activity is taking place, geographically, someone should be charged with quantifying both agricultural and drinking water depletion, and especially in light of climate change. Now, our information reveals not only immediate but chronic and latent hazards that are posed to human and wildlife health from chemical contaminants being introduced in our watersheds, but also an emerging threat to our air that will not go away until the gas fields are shut down and the stationary and mobile sources associated with processing and delivering gas are no longer in operation. And this is not generally discussed when the impacts of gas production are under consideration. So we all must now think in terms of prevention, and I want to thank you and just show you the people who have helped us. Our Western Colorado Congress, the second on the list, is a very small group but very powerful. And they actually were the ones who took our lobbying message to the state of Colorado, where we were able for the first time to get some language into some rules, only language and in rules, about full open disclosure. The Wild Earth Guardians is an excellent group to work with. They worked with the ozone situation. They had data and stats. They're very, very helpful. And of course, we worked with the Natural Resources Defense Council out of Washington, D.C. And I have to give credit to these foundations that have supported my work. You can see the New York Community Trust right up there on top. And we did have an EPA environmental justice grant that just expired that gave us the opportunity to put all this stuff together and try to make it into some kind of comprehensive information that you, the citizens out there, can use. And you see, just one thing. For a list of chemicals, you can go to our website, and every chemical I've talked about, they're all there. If you want, you Word an Excel spreadsheet, you can play with it and have a lot of fun with it. We have nothing specific for New York yet, I'm sorry to say. Maybe by the end of the summer, we'll have more information on New York, but nothing came forward from there. And thank you again.
How you doing, folks? Well, what do you think of this so far? Scary? If we, the people that lived in Hickory, had the information that you have now, I could guarantee you there would have probably been a handful of people that would sign the lease, because you're always going to have that margin of people that don't care and they're just looking for the money. But I could tell you this, if I would have known then what I know now, I would have ran the land person off my property by his neck. Or her neck, I should say. But watching this just scares me so badly, because there's so many people down there affected. And they claim there aren't any reports of water contamination. Well, our DEP does not report. They're in bed with the oil and gas industry, because the oil and gas industry runs this country, and we all know that. They're able to line every pocket possible. They even went as far as put in they donated $35,000 for a statue, a bronze statue that they placed in front of our fire hall of a farmer holding a calf, and it has like a 5-gallon milk can beside him. And 3 farmers were talking one day, and one of the farmers, I knew one of them, but anyhow, he was telling me, I wasn't there, but he told me he met him at the corner store, and they were all talking about that statue. And they said, you know, that statue is Hickory's tombstone, and it's a tombstone for the farmers, which is very true. But again, as I sit back and I watch this and everything that I've learned, it's absolutely outrageous and frightening what our federal government has done to us. Your land, I guarantee, will be stripped. And I also guarantee your land will not be worth what it was before you leased. And I think the best way to kind of sum this up, it's like playing Russian roulette. It's like I tell you, okay, folks, I'm going to put $1 million right here, and I'm going to have a pistol right here, and I'm going to put one bullet in a cylinder, and I'm going to spin it. Okay, well, put it to your head. If it goes off, you lose. You don't get the $1 million. You have a few chances, maybe, because you never know when your water is going to be contaminated. You don't have a clue. You don't know about your land being contaminated. As Dr. Theo Colborn mentioned about the air, all these tanks, you have breathers on top of these tanks. Summertime, you'll see the vapors just coming right off. Go up around them and take a whiff of it. You'll get the worst headache of your life. I've done it. So I stay completely away from them. Workers will tell me the same thing, because I will go up to the workers and I will give them information. I say, you don't even know what you're working with. Here, read it. Here are websites. Get on them. Educate yourself. As I was telling the gentleman earlier, Glenn and some of the other folks, I've gone up to policemen that were sitting, patrolling bridges, and went right up to them and introduced myself and gave them literature and information. And they're overwhelmed. And they come right out and tell me, once these guys came into town like a tornado, they've had a lot of problems. You have a lot of DUIs, because these boys work hard and they play hard. So it affects your community, it affects your life, and the life that you once knew, it's gone. I could guarantee you that. As soon as you sign that lease, you have just signed your life away. And as Candace said, they got you, and they know it. And all the burden of proof is upon you. And they've got the attorneys just lined up, and they've got all the money. They've got very, very deep pockets, because no one knows what comes out of those holes but themselves. The companies are the only ones that know. So, I try to tell everybody, you've got to get involved. You got to work with others toward a common cause, toward this common cause, so that we could all make a positive difference in our world. And we must all unite together to win this war, because that's what it is. It's a war for your health. It's a war for your children. It's a war for their children. I met a farmer. I've done so many talks. I mean, I run from place to place. People call me because Chesapeake will be here at a local fire hall trying to get leases. Range will be over here, at another community. So they want me to go and ask the right questions and get them all fired up. And I do. And it's been working. But it is exhausting, because again, the liability is all upon each and every one of you in a community, and they don't care. And they will do whatever it takes to get that lease signed. So anything worth fighting for is a worthwhile cause. And again, this is a fight. And I kind of got off the track there. I did meet a farmer 2 weeks ago. He's in litigation. He couldn't talk a lot about it. He lost 8 head of cattle. The following year, some of his calves, he had calves, of course, that were born, and they were born blind. There are a whole lot of stories like this, folks, but they shut a lot of people up because they buy them off. But some people are coming forward. There's a story that came out from Reuters, which I showed Glenn this evening. The last paragraph, John Hurdle did the story, and John Hurdle's been following all the episodes pretty much throughout Pennsylvania, and he's done about 6 stories. And of course, Reuters is an international paper, which is larger than our AP, Associated Press. And it all started in Hickory. And he did the first story back in February. But the story that he just did, it came out May, I think the 5th. The last paragraph, he interviewed a farmer from Clearville, Pennsylvania. He has 105 acres. He made $1 million over the last several years. He said he'd never sign a lease again. He's had 4 head of cattle die. His iron level in his blood is elevated. They won't, of course, tell him anything about the fluids because everything is secret. They don't have to disclose. But he would never sign a lease again. So, and I've told a lot of people, a lot of my customers that have large tracts of land, because I sell heavy equipment for a living, don't do it. It's either money or your health or your life. And a lot of these people, I mean, when they think about it and I give them the information and the websites to go on, they're just totally flabbergasted and they didn't have a clue. And a whole lot of people haven't leased because of it. So I'm here just, again, as awareness. Folks, you've got more information. And Dr. Theo Colborn, the gal is world-renowned. She is an expert. So I would definitely take all this back home, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, And I can tell you one thing right now, any landman comes to your property, or land person, I should say, tell them to put it in writing that it's a benign process. See what they do. If it were benign, why would you ever have all those exemptions put into place? If it's safe, why would you have all those exemptions put into place? Because they have no liabilities. Absolutely none. And I lived a hell since '05. They drilled on my farm in '05, '06, and '07. And the acronym is Hold by Production, HBP. That's why they'll drill one here, and they'll run over here, and one over here, and they just keep poking them in each unit or each pool. Now they've got you. Again, because they hold you by production. So I guess the bottom line is the money or your life.
I grew up in the southern part of Tompkins County on a small dairy farm that my parents operated, and I was the oldest of four. And in the 1950s, they drilled a well into a gas well about a mile deep, about a half a mile from where I lived, and it was a pretty benign process. Everybody saw the well go in, and we saw a little bit of gas come out, and then they closed it up because they weren't able to extract gas from it. And of course, they come around every so often and want to update their leases, and they were just around a few years back trying to get leases, but now they're talking about signing bonuses, a whole different ball of wax, and trying to figure out what was going on. And now, of course, we learn about Marcellus Shale, and there's a lot of extra activity going on. I've been involved with local government for 16 years, and I firmly believe in democracy, and I've been following this issue. I'm not an expert, just a town supervisor, but I do know that there is some activity going on. I want to make you aware of it and some things that you can do. I could cover 4 areas. One is in the area of permitting. DEC has permitted, 14,000 wells in New York State, and they've all been done under a generic environmental impact statement, which means under seeker, there's not a specific site review for any of these wells. But when it came to Marcellus Shale drilling, to Governor Patterson's credit, he said we need to review this process because this is significantly different, and I want to see a supplemental generic environmental impact statement be done, and that's happening as we speak. Last fall and early winter, there were a number of scoping sessions to find out what this would cover, and now there's a commission that's working on those rules, and that commission will be telling us how DEC is going to regulate drilling in hydrofracture drilling in Marcellus Shale. We'll know that probably in the next couple of months. Pay attention to that, but before that time, there's something that you can do. You personally, and you should ask all your legislators, local and at the state level, to request that the comment period be extended from 30 days to 90 days. We're talking about a significant document. 30 days to comprehend what they're talking about is not enough. We still have time. The commissioner still can change the comment period, so I urge you to get involved and do this. It'll be one of the most important things you can do to make sure that your voice is heard as part of what democracy is about. 30 days is not enough. The other thing that you can do to become part of the seeker process is work with your local municipalities to develop critical environmental areas. They're called CEAs. They're described in the seeker regulations under 617.14. And these don't have to be, they can be protection of aquifers, but they can be unique natural areas, but they can also be cultural areas and things that are important to your community. There's a process that can happen. It's not onerous, but local governments have to do it. And once these areas have been identified, if any well or any activity is going to take place in your area that requires a seeker process, and gas drilling does require a seeker process, these areas will have to be taken into account. So that gets you into the game of protecting your community. You have to be doing this now, because once the gas well permits come out, they've started the process. So the sooner you get working on it, the better off you'll be. As mentioned earlier, that we will have up to 5 million gallons of water coming to be used in each well. The interesting part of this is that water is permanently relieved from your watershed. You know, you talk about cities and they may use a couple gallons of water a day, but that's evaporated and that goes into your wastewater treatment plant. That stays in your watershed. This water leaves. That's a lot of water. There's currently a New York State law being presented by Assemblyman Brennan. It's number 8748, and it talks about this particular issue, protecting watersheds. It also talks about understanding what's in the fracking fluid. It also talks about holding drillers accountable for any changes in water quality. They must prove that they did not do it. Turns the tables. This does not have a significant amount of support. It's up to us to talk to our legislatures to get that kind of support. It's a very important bill. There's another issue out there that we signed, New York State signed with Canada. It has to deal with the Great Lakes watershed, and just north of here, for the Finger Lakes and so on, they all drain north. Anyone in that watershed is bound by a state international treaty that we cannot remove permanently water from a watershed, and that's what this will happen. So it's an issue out there. We need to remind all our state legislators that this is important, and we're flying in the face of international treaties to pull water from our watershed permanently. We've had a lot of talk tonight about fracking fluid and not knowing what's in there. Well, the Brennan bill wants to know what's in there. They asked for it. But there's also federal legislation that our own Congressman Maurice Hinchey has sponsored, and it's HR number 2766, and its express purpose is to understand what is in the fracking fluid and to hold gas companies and oil drilling companies accountable to the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. This is undoing the Halliburton exemption that was put into place in 2005. Again, not a lot of support. So many of us are represented by Congressman Curry. He needs to hear from us. He needs to get on board with this issue. One of the things that happens with fracking fluid is that the fracking fluid is taken to municipal facilities. At least they're trying to. They're also looking at treating it with private facilities as well as disposal wells. And disposal wells are not currently, we don't believe are being talked about in the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. We need to make sure that this is brought forward. Again, whenever the rules are brought out, this is an opportunity to make sure that we let them know this needs to be covered. But one of the issues dealing with fracking fluid and dealing with where the water is coming from and how it's treated is DEC monitoring. And many of you may realize that DEC has a very small staff in gas drilling. Not only do they have a small staff, but we have a problem with the state budget, which doesn't allow us to hire more staff. One of the things that you can be asking your state legislatures to work with, and also your local ones to be pushing, is called a fuel production tax or a severance tax. New York State is the only state with gas production that does not have this. We currently have an assessment process, and we heard about town of Lebanon getting only $12,000 of assessed property tax value from their wells. Severance tax is based on the amount of gas that's produced, and it's a direct way to get income, and it should be shared equally between the state and the local governments. I can tell you with the state budget problems, it will be taken up next year. It will be an issue, and we need to be engaged so that local governments are receiving some of it, as well as the state, so it can ensure the proper amount of oversight. And finally, I'd just like to make you aware of that local governments have actually been taken out of the process for siting natural gas wells, and it was done by one section of law. It's Environmental Conservation Law 23, Section 303-2, and if I may read you, it's very short what it says. The provisions of this article shall supersede all local laws or ordinance relating to the regulation of oil, gas, and solution mining industries, but shall not supersede local government jurisdiction over local roads or rights of local government under the real property tax law. This needs to be repealed. All the work that you've done on planning and thinking about your vision for your community is all out the window because it's all being superseded by an industry that doesn't really care about this area, doesn't know anything about our history, our communities. It's important that we ask our legislature to rescind this section, and it can be done. The Sierra Club is pushing it very hard. It's their initiative. We should get on board with our local legislatures, asking them to do the same. And so, when I read that, they did actually give local governments a caveat, and that is that we can control local roads. And I will urge you to work with your local town and county legislatures to make sure that you have a permitting process for overweight trucks on your roads. For many of us that have supervisors and highway superintendents in rural towns, we know that heavy trucks can do a lot of damage to our roads. And guess what? These gas companies can come in to do that, and we are left holding the bag as property taxpayers, and we heard about the town of Lebanon having that issue. There are local laws that are out there. There are models. Many municipalities are working on this right now. Whenever you require a permit, that means your local government, who's closest to you, will be part of the process. Gas companies cannot come into your town and start drilling without going for a permit within your town. And guess what? Your town can ask them to put up a maintenance bond so that whenever the road has to be repaired, they pay for it and not you. There's opportunities out there. I think at this point in time, I'll stop, so hopefully you can ask some questions. But our most important job, has been mentioned by every speaker, is to keep talking this up, talk about this issue. As it says in the little handout that you received, this is the biggest change in our area since they cut down all the trees for farming. It's huge. Thank you.
Is there any way that the gas company and/or town can utilize your property through a process of involving eminent domain?
I believe if 60% of the land around an area, in a unit, is leased, that yes, there's something called compulsory integration, and they can pull you in. You have some choices as how to go about it, but yes, you can be pulled in.
I just had a follow-up comment. When it comes to running gas lines to connect these wells to another main, they can use eminent domain to put the gas line through.
If you know you're in that 60% of that land unit, do you have more rights if you sign or not sign? Are you on the radar even if you don't sign?
I'm Chris Berger, and I chair the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition. And we're trying to, much like everybody else, get a handle on this issue. We started off in sustainability, economic sustainability, but we knew very quickly that if we didn't get a good handle on this issue, all our other efforts would be of naught. But to address the issue, it's interesting, the rule of compulsory integration is actually being used as a stick to get people to sign, because if it basically comes down to, if you don't sign and you go the compulsory integration route, you don't have all those other issues that you can incorporate in the lease that was negotiated with everybody else. So, like I said, it's kind of used as a stick to get you to sign. And the other thing is, you also lose out on how where things are located and everything. We've done scenarios where basically someone who let's say has a piece of property and they've leased, well, they'll probably want to push that siding of the gas well to the edges of their property. Now, there's spacing setbacks that they have to abide by, but the bottom line is when you're forced into these situations, you have a lot less control over this. No, they can't go on your surface, but they can, I guess what I'm trying to say is they can, they possibly be located at the far end of the person who signed the lease, and then, which could be very close to your property.
I'm wondering if you sign and then your water is destroyed and you really don't have a home anymore, don't you give away your right ever to sue if you've already signed?
I'm Stan Scobie. I'm a consultant on gas drilling law in New York State. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think you give up everything, but I think it gets complicated, and I think that you would want to get real good advice.
One thing
I should say, and it actually has been mentioned before, that basically these leases are almost, I hate to say it because there's a lot of people working very hard because basically the government has abandoned us all, and really there's a lot of landowners that are trying to take the place of what government should do through their own, through a leasing process. But at the end of the day, and we're finding this pattern already, that anything that happens, you're going to have to sue for enforcement, basically what it comes down to. And there, you go to court, and there you're really outgunned. You really don't, and there's been cases already where basically maybe the landowners have won their case, but then there's all those appeals, and they'll just appeal, they'll wait you out. So at the end of the day, without our government taking back the, getting the exemptions repealed and getting getting the government back on our side, all these leases, as well as intentioned as they are, aren't going to do us very much good.
However, get your water tested before drilling goes on.
Yeah, and I do have a follow-up to that now, after I thought about it a little bit. In environmental conservation law, there are assertions that it is not allowed to pollute the water. So there's a basis for saying, if that happened to your water well, that somebody, and somebody did it, that there is a liability on that part, not on your part. You haven't given up your rights. Secondly, in Pennsylvania, it's presumptive if a water well is damaged within 1,000 feet of a gas drilling operation that it's the fault of the driller. There may be legislation currently in the Assembly on that in New York State. In New York State, that protection does not exist. So how well it works in Pennsylvania is another question. It doesn't appear to work really, really well, but it's at least there. It should be there. Something like that should be there for New York State.
I want you to go back to the question of compulsory integration, because I believe I've read that some people have been pulled into compulsory education when in fact the DEC should not have granted the permit, that the gas companies did not have the number of units they needed to do that compulsory integration. So there is no one to really supervise that. Is there anyone who could comment on that?
I'll try. There's slippage. I think that's true for all states and the government between what the regulations say and what actually happens. We just saw that in the economic sphere over the last year or so. So that, right, exactly. The enforcement, the issue of enforcement, which is really what you're speaking about, how well are the regulations about compulsory integration, whatever, enforced, is messy. And there's not good information about how well enforcement occurs. It's not supposed to happen the way you described. In other words, the companies are supposed to have in hand leases for 60% of the unit that they want to drill on before they're given a permit. If they have that 60%, they can then say, and I want this other 40%. And they get it. That's the way the law reads. Those are the specified circumstances for the permit. Whether they always happen that way, I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows. So it goes to how effective DEC can enforce its regulations, as well as how good the regulations are in the first place.
think if you were given notice that you were being compulsorily integrated, you could figure that out. I mean, you could go to the county clerk's office, find out, you can find out from the DEC what the unit is, you can find out, you know, where the leases are, and you could calculate if they have 60%. I mean, that's public information.
It does go to, if I may add, the fact that DEC is terribly understaffed already, and we haven't even begun the process. And so and then there has been some attempts by some legislators to give them more resources through, it's already been mentioned, things like taxes on the gas drilling, and they've been beaten down. So this is a real problem going forward.
Do they have compulsory integration in Pennsylvania? How did we get it in New York? And what do we have to do to repeal it?
I'm not familiar with it in Pennsylvania. I don't know if we have it or not. I can tell you right now, there's a gal that lives only approximately 5 miles from me. They built a brand new house on 10 acres that they bought in '07. And before I get into this, I can tell you right now, folks, you need to do a lot of policing yourself. You need to do file reviews at the local permitting office, and you've got to keep a close eye on what they're doing. And you've got to report every mishap that they do, you better report it. But this gal was doing it. They built a brand new home in '07, 10 acres. Farmer that they purchased the property off of has a few hundred acres there. Well, the gal leased the whole place out naturally, and the company came in and they got a permit to put in a compressor plant. But see, that's what a lot of you folks don't realize. You just don't have gas wells and gas lines. You've got compressor stations, you've got propane extraction stations. Everything changes. This is huge. Well, the permit, again, was supposed to be for a compressor station. They have a liquid propane extraction station there. They totally violated the permit. She turns it into the DEP. He says, you really got them. They did this twice. About 10 miles away or 8 miles away, another little community, they did the very same thing. They got a permit to put in a compressor station, and they put in a liquid propane extraction station. Now, as far as water is concerned, I went to these folks a couple months ago, and I told them about what could possibly happen with their water being contaminated. And her husband, he's a school teacher, and he kind of looked at me like I was a kook, basically. And he said, I've been drinking well water my whole life. I said, I understand that, but you don't realize what you're exposed to here. They just had their water tested, and it came back a week and a half ago. They got the phone call immediately. Do not drink the water. Do not touch the water. They've been bathing in this water, 2 young children, 4 and 8, for the last 2 years. And the DEP tested the water. They didn't test for what this other lab tested for. So there are serious issues here. And now they couldn't thank me enough, because they would have continued doing what they were doing and not even thought a thing about it. But these permits, like I said, you're going to have to police a lot of this.
I just want to respond to the compulsory integration of New York State law. The same Article 23 of Environmental Conservation Law is where this compulsory integration is codified, and we would have to go to our legislature to get it undone. And that's part of the process we need to be working on. Compulsory integration is essentially an eminent domain. They're taking your minerals from underneath your land without you having say in it. Of course, you are compensated with a royalty, but that's all you're compensated with.
500 gallons of water are permanently lost from the watershed. Do you know where that water goes and part of the process of drilling that's used for?
It's 500 million gallons. Oh, yeah, 5 million gallons, between 2 and 5 million gallons, we're told. The hydrofracking uses the water under high pressure to shoot down into the shale and break it open so that the gas will flow. Some of it comes back. There's a percentage, difference. Some say 90% comes back, some say only 10% comes back, but the rest of it stays in there. Then the other way that it's lost forever is if they take that contaminated water and one of the options for getting rid of the water is using deep injection disposal wells, which are either wells that they drilled for the purpose or old wells that are not producing gas. We have one in our town, it's a Trenton Black River well that goes about 4,000 or 5,000 feet down. Oh, 9,000 on that one. And so one of the options is to put this contaminated water down in those wells forever.
And the other obvious one is if they contract with a contractor to remove the wastewater and the disposal site happens to be outside of the watershed.
Another thing in Pennsylvania, when this all started, folks, it went this way. They claimed that 70% of the water was coming back, flow back, and only 30% was staying. Then as time progressed, that reversed. So they can't monitor. It's hard to monitor because when they frack, and you don't know how many fractures are in the formation down there, there's a lot of water going in a lot of places. That's why, naturally the gas migrates also. I mean, we had so many people down there that had methane in their water. Manganese, people's water turned black. But guess what? There weren't any reports.
I have a slightly different kind of comment. I'm listening to all this and I'm thinking of that comment, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. And it certainly seems like the goings are getting tough. And I guess I'm afraid because my wife and I have been following this issue for quite some time and trying to educate others and realize once you learn a lot of this has the potential to be upsetting and overwhelming. And I see a few gray-haired people here who are probably in retirement thinking I wasn't supposed to be fighting a fight like this at this stage of my life. So I see it as kind of calling upon us to have a paradigm shift in terms of protecting our communities, protecting our environment, our health, the future. And this is a very educational forum, but I'm also want to acknowledge that it's important the motivation that comes out of this, because if we leave here tonight saying this is so big we might as well just throw in the towel and feel helpless, then we didn't necessarily further it. And I'm sure there was a time where each person here didn't know or didn't care about this issue, but you heard something, you learned something and said, I need to get involved. So I think we all have to become educators, and even if we do it in a subtle way or in a more intense way, the more people we bring in and the louder we are, the more phone calls we make, then we won't necessarily feel helpless in the face of a multinational corporation. So I think that's perhaps a paradigm shift that we need to actually believe is very possible and necessary, because there's no other choice, really.
Do you have a question?
No.
No question.
To follow up on the compulsory integration again, I just want to make sure I'm absolutely clear on that. If they have 60% of the people around you, is it 60% of the acres around you?
Yeah, acreage in a unit, in a drilling unit.
And now, assuming you don't sign, you're integrated, and can they actually drill on your land, or are they just allowed to take the resources from underneath?
They can drill under it. I mean, they can drill on someone else's land and go under your land too.
Okay, so you can deprive them of any access by trucks, by anything else, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that is an advantage by not signing.
But theoretically, there would be, possibility of water contamination on your property.
But I mean, if you can't stop the others because they're just determined to get that money, at least you can protect your immediate surroundings.
Right, they would not have surface rights to your property. And you would also get the minimum royalty, which would be 12.5%.
Yeah, the term surface rights is an important one. That has to do with can they come on, as Candace mentioned. The other term is mineral rights. And some people own surface rights but not mineral rights. It gets complicated. That doesn't happen around here, but it does happen in Western New York. That changes the situation remarkably. In other words, and what I'm trying to say is to make clear that mineral rights trump surface rights. So if somebody owns your mineral rights, which may happen around here, it doesn't. It may, but there's not much of it now. If it does, then they can come on your land and pretty much do what they want. Yes, mineral rights trump surface rights. That's the phrase to remember.
What's puzzling to me is that we hear all the data to clearly inform us that this is a non-acceptable process of gas drilling, as is mountaintop removal in the Appalachian area. If we're so clear about the unacceptability of this process for humans, for animals, for the environment, for just the basic essentials of life, water and air, and to have the greens grow around us. Why do we think we can regulate or compromise in this situation? It just seems so clear that we're playing around with fire and wanting to have it burn. I don't think you can have both. The legislator in the Appalachian area in Virginia, West Virginia, said, he's a very old legislator, he said, you need an executive order and you need to have a landswell of people saying this is unacceptable. And it almost needs to say that it cannot happen. It may not happen because it's destructive to all involved except the pocketbook. So I just wonder why we play with this, give all this information and then try to regulate or compromise.
Well, I would just say to that, I mean, I think more and more as fossil fuels run out, we are going to be faced with what we're going to do. And there's going to be more and more pressures on our environment, on our health, on all the things that we hold dear if we have to keep going after those fossil fuels. So talk about a paradigm shift. I mean, we really have to be able to figure out how we are going to heat our homes without natural gas. And can we do that in time before we sacrifice so much for it?
I'm a town councilman in the town that she's in, and I'm dealing with that well that she's talking about that they're going to use for storage. I can tell you that the one thing you want to do is check your town board and find out whether they're lease signers. Because if they're lease signers, they're probably not going to cooperate with trying to control the lease or the gas companies. The other hat that I wear in town is also the fire department, and that's something out of all the meetings that I've gone to, I've never heard anybody talk about, is your first responders. If you have a truck spill, chemical spill, you call 911. The people that are responding are not trained to take care of this. The only training that I went to, I'm also in the fire department, the only training that they gave us, as far as the gas industry goes, they let us look at all their equipment. They give us the general knowledge of it, which once we walked away from there, we had no idea what they were talking about. But the only thing that they told us was if there's a fire, you protect the forest around it, you protect the houses, but you leave the gas wells alone, so you know nothing about what to do. And that's the people that you're going to be calling for help. So I'll give you a little idea where you stand.
I would just like to ask the question of you folks from Broome County as to why you feel, I guess, good about having your county exec send a lobbyist to Albany to fast track this process. And I have reamed her out, and I'm not from your county. But how did that happen?
It is sort of part of a democratic process. You may not like it. Democracy is not neat and clean. I'm not supporting the idea. I don't think it's a good expenditure of $15,000. I don't think you can buy much in the way of a lobbyist for $15,000. And so it seems to me that it's much more symbolic than anything else. On the other hand, I very much respect the democratic process and rule of law. And I think it's very important to hear voices.
There's a question, because I was a county legislator once, and it just seemed like contracts had to go through the county legislature. This was a county executive decision, really not a county legislative decision. But my sense is that ultimately it's going to come back, and if DEC rushes this, it's ultimately going to delay it. So I pose the question to the county executive that, if you don't want to win this one, because if she was successful in pressing the DEC to cut corners, that is ultimately going to result in lawsuits. DEC is going to probably wind up with a lawsuit anyway. Because of the things that they've left off the table through the scoping process. But if they expose themselves to any, if there's any sense of them cutting corners, that just opens themselves up to more of those lawsuits. So the real irony is if the county executive is successful, it'll actually be the exact opposite result of what she was trying to accomplish. That's my sense.
You had said that they were going to use an abandoned well for disposal. I was under the impression from prior meetings that they were supposed to seal these abandoned wells.
Well, yeah, but if they're using it for disposal, then they don't have to seal it. They're using it for, it's a different permitting process. They have to go through the EPA. Has to be tested for pressure to make sure it's compatible with the use. But if that becomes its function, then it can go on until it's full.
Also, I really question long-term sealing anyway. Sealing a process will last whatever amount of years, but it won't last forever. And I really think it's once again basically putting the problem under a rug that eventually will come out and bite us.
Yeah, and that well was a well that, had just run out of gas. It hadn't produced very well. They've been sort of keeping it open for a while. It hasn't come to the point of sealing. There would be a time when they would have to seal it up, but instead they're considering it for disposal.
There's a related issue about abandoned wells that doesn't apply very much in Broome County, but it does in other parts of the state, probably in Pennsylvania. I testified to this at the scoping hearings last fall. The DEC knows that it has a bunch, they don't know how many, of abandoned wells that were never plugged. One of the things that happened during World War II is that the well casings, these are steel, were pulled out of wells that weren't producing much or weren't producing anything and salvaged for scrap, and the wells were plugged with tree stumps or whatever you had around, bed springs. It's not a good way to plug it. Now the very intriguing but scary problem there is supposing you shoot a big Marcellus well nearby, and it happens to be at about the same depth as this abandoned well, which isn't plugged. So now the fracking fluid makes a U-turn, comes up and goes wherever the hell it wants to go. This is a very difficult problem. It's an environmental justice issue because it refers to places, not right around here. Allegheny County is the one I'm familiar with, but it poses serious problems. The DEC acknowledges this and does not have a good solution for it.
We were hearing about experience, reality on the ground in Colorado. In Pennsylvania, she was talking about the constituents in the water that's extracted from the gas as it's produced. No, not the fracking fluid. When the gas is coming out of the ground, it has to be, the water has to be it has to be dried off and so on. And that's collected in these tanks, and then that's serviced by trucks that take it somewhere. I mean, Western Pennsylvania, they're putting on the roads to keep the dust down. It's got salt in it. And they have no idea what else is in it.
Right.
But it's being put on the roads. And then that keeps the dust down. Or it's inhaled by people who inhale that dust and all the chemicals that are in it along with the salt. That's being done in Western Pennsylvania. They're probably looking at doing it in the Dimick area. It's free, free road maintenance because they normally put calcium down and other products that they have to pay for.
Right.
Well, this is free now.
Right, but this is not. This is the brine from wells that aren't fracked, right? This is the
No. Brine that's produced out of the wells has been in New York and I guess in Pennsylvania used to spread on roads. They tell us they're not doing that in New York now. There are a lot of eyes looking at how the DEC enforces and regulates, and so things are different, or at least sufficiently different. That goes to your question, why are we doing this at all? You had a question about when the bus leaves to Albany. What I encourage you to do is stay up with some of the websites. The DCS website, Damascus Citizens, is pretty good for Pennsylvania stuff. And those people have been doing that for quite a while. I've worked with some of them. The BRISC website is a little immature, let's say. It's a teenager in this process. Shaleshock is pretty good. These kinds of sites will keep you up to date on, kind of like what's happening, and is there a bunch, there were going to be a bunch of people go up to Albany on the 9th, but you all know what happened in Albany on the day before, and it's still going on, so they didn't go. But those are certainly possibilities, and those are the things you got to do. You got to talk to your legislators. That's how things change.
My sense is, there's a big attempt to try to solve this with lease agreements. Yet I can't help but think that at the end of the day, you could have the tightest lease going, and you're ultimately going to have to sue for enforcement. And when that happens, you're in an arena that is very difficult to win, simply because they have a lot more money and a lot more lawyers than you will ever have. And again, there's been situations where people have actually won the case, yet through the appeal process itself will just drag on and on and on, and maybe your children will get something out of it, but they can outweight you as well.
My question of you, Ron, is could you tell us what happened to your pond, and which some I've seen on the video, but I also want to know what did you do about their offer to move you to another farm?
What happened there was they did a bait and switch on me, and they wanted me to use their realtor, and they wanted me to sign a dual agreement. I was so disgusted with fighting with these people. As I told my wife and my mom, who's now 82 years old, I said, I don't care if this place is worth $5 million. I said, I'm worried about our health. The pond is on the west side of the farm, and my house is on the east side, and I have a stream that comes, of course, from the overflow of the pond. And my farm is like a big bowl. Well, naturally, that water table, I don't know what's going to be in it. And when I worked in this industry, I never saw this technique that they were doing as far as the black water in the flow pits. And when I started asking questions, this got them alarmed. And everything was coming from the top of that location hill right into my pond. And I said, where is your soil and erosion control plan? They don't have one. I could show you photographs that would blow your mind of all the mud going into my pond. It was almost 3 acres. I said, you're going to kill the fish. And again, you're on your own, because I went to the township. Of course, they couldn't do anything. I went to my extension office. They couldn't do anything. So, and the farm, again, back to your question, the farm that they tried to bait me with, I'm embarrassed about this because I'm so stupid. But I couldn't deal with it anymore because I worked so hard on this place. And I bought this place in 1990. This isn't the farm that I grew up on when I was 10 years old. I bought this place in 1990. The other farm that I grew up on, I also lost through corruption. And that's another story. But anyhow, this other farm that they baited me with, and it was their idea. They said, what if we buy this other farm in exchange for yours? Then again, you got to work with this landman, because this was a different guy that I was talking to, because he couldn't do anything for him, but you got to talk to this guy. So, okay, I talked to this guy. Then he hooks me up with this realtor. Anyway, I told him to do a title search on the farm. He didn't do it because they already knew the history of this farm, because a month to the day that I signed a sales agreement, they made an offer on that same farm, and it was the same real estate agent. And the people turned them down. They didn't want their facility, they didn't want anything to do with them on that property. And these folks were all elderly people in their 70s and 80s. Meanwhile, out of that 165 acres of that farm, 65 acres was leased. I didn't want to go to another leased piece of property. I didn't want anything to do with this process. You could take it. Because I knew there was a problem. Something didn't smell right. And I still didn't know at that time. This was in 06 when the pond got contaminated, July of 06. And the DEP said to Damascus that it was an open and shut case. It was reported in September of 06, closed in October of 06. It was opened in July of 06. I didn't receive a letter until January 24th of 07 stating that it had nothing to do with the drilling process. This is what they do to you. Now, back to me telling you folks about the gal that just had her water tested and they found chemicals in it. She just went a week, let's see, it'd be a week, last Thursday. She went to do a file review at the DEP's office in downtown Pittsburgh. She got there. There wasn't anything in her file. It was empty. She had numerous reports to the DEP. This is what they're doing, folks. And I can tell you right now, this stems right to your governor. This stems right to every politician in place, because this is what they want. Because they've got a plan that you know nothing about, that they've already devised in a closed room. We would have never they would have never did the federal exemptions that they did if they didn't have a plan devised. So, and right now, I'm fighting them tooth and nail, and I went to a bank to get a loan to support my appeal, because I appealed it from Washington County, and that's another story. When I went through there for a week and a half. And when I appealed it to Superior Court, that's where it's at right now, I had to come up with $75,000. So I did that, and when I did the appeal, let me think about this. I went to a banker, a commercial loan banker, or a loan officer, and I asked him, as far as borrowing the money. And he came up with this scenario, basically, that I've been through Greene County, I've been through Washington County, I've seen the roads, I've seen the well tanks, I've seen all the destruction, and this is all new to the banking industry. And it doesn't matter how many wells are on your property. It's a commodity. It goes up and down with the market. So we can't put a value to it. And he said, Ron, this is like the Obama stimulus package. It's all new, and we don't know how it's going to work. And your land, he gave me an example, your land may be worth $500,000. After we do an appraisal to it, it may be worth $200,000. And we don't want your land.